My family and I had just moved into a cozy house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The scent of fresh paint still lingered in the air, a reminder of our fresh start. It was a picturesque place, with manicured lawns, white picket fences, and friendly neighbors. Our next-door neighbor, Mr. Johnson, was the first to greet us. He was a portly man with a hearty smile and a firm handshake. He welcomed us warmly, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of Southern hospitality.
"Y'all must be the new neighbors. Welcome to the neighborhood,"
he exclaimed, his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth.
"I hope you'll find this place as wonderful as my family and I have over the years."
We exchanged pleasantries, and he offered his assistance with anything we might need during our transition. It was a relief to know that we had such a friendly neighbor nearby. He even brought over a homemade apple pie, a gesture that solidified his reputation as the welcome committee of the block. As time passed, our family settled into our new home. Mr. Johnson proved to be more than just a friendly neighbor. He was a lifesaver when our lawnmower broke down, and he volunteered to help my husband with the repairs. With each passing day, we built rapport with Mr. Johnson. He would stop by with gardening tips, share stories about the neighborhood's history, and even invited us to a neighborhood barbecue he hosted every summer. Our children adored him, and we appreciated the sense of community he fostered. But as time went on, strange things started happening. It was subtle at first, like the odd assortment of lawn ornaments he displayed in his front yard. Garden gnomes stood alongside eerie, life-sized scarecrows with unsettling smiles that seemed to follow us. Then came the strange noises. We'd hear odd sounds coming from Mr. Johnson's house. It was as if someone was dragging heavy furniture across the floor, or knocking on walls in a rhythmic pattern. We brushed it off as the creaks and groans of the old house. One evening, I stepped outside to retrieve our mail just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I saw Mr. Johnson in his backyard, engaging in a strange ritual. He circled a fire pit, adorned with flickering candles, chanting in a language I couldn't understand. The flames cast eerie shadows across his face, making him look like a figure from a horror movie. I quickly retreated inside. I didn't know what to make of it, but unease settled in my gut like a heavy stone. The next morning, I couldn't help but share my concerns with my husband, who had also noticed bizarre occurrences. We decided that we need to find out more about Mr. Johnson, to quell the rising anxiety that had taken roots in our minds. We had to understand the man who had welcomed us so warmly, yet had begun to exhibit such strange and unsettling behavior. We began by asking our neighbors if they had noticed anything unusual about him. It was surprising how little everyone seemed to know about him. They too had appreciated his friendly gestures, but hadn't ventured beyond the surface. So, apparently, we were on our own. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the neighborhood, we saw Mr. Johnson in his backyard again. This time, he was digging a deep hole, illuminated only by the faint glow of the moon. It was an odd hour for yard work. My husband and I decided to take a closer look. We crept to the edge of our property, our footsteps barely making a sound on the dewy grass. Peering over the fence, we watched in stunned silence as Mr. Johnson continued to dig, his movements methodical and deliberate. We needed more information, something concrete to justify our suspicions. It was then that we remembered the strange noises coming from his house late at night. My husband, armed with a flashlight, carefully approached the back door of Mr. Johnson's house. I watched anxiously from our yard, my heart pounding in my chest. He pushed open the door slowly, revealing a dimly lit interior. The strange noises had ceased for the moment. My husband stepped inside, guided by the faint glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains. The house appeared ordinary at first, but something felt off. It was as if the walls held secrets, and the air was heavy with unspoken darkness. My husband carefully made his way through the hallway, eventually reaching the source of the sounds, a locked door. I watched as he examined the door, searching for any signs of tampering. It didn't take long for him to find it, scratch marks around the edges, as if someone had desperately tried to escape. He beckoned me to join him, and together we managed to pick the lock with the help of my hair clip. The door swung open, revealing a hidden room within Mr. Johnson's house. The room was dimly lit by a single, flickering candle, casting eerie shadows on the walls. My husband and I exchanged a nervous glance before stepping inside. What we found inside that room would haunt our nightmares for years to come. The walls were covered in disturbing photographs of women, some alive but bound, some dead, missing their limbs. Newspaper clippings with a big red X drawn over them. They told a chilling story of unsolved disappearances and murders that stretched back decades. My stomach turned and I threw up on the floor. As we examined the evidence, a sickening realization washed over us. Mr. Johnson was not the friendly neighbor we had believed him to be. He was a cold-blooded serial killer, his sinister activities hidden behind the facade of a welcoming neighbor. Photographs of his victims adorned the walls, their faces forever frozen in terror. Each newspaper clipping told a story of a life cut short, of families torn apart by tragedy. The room was a macabre shrine to his dark deeds, and the weight of the truth pressed down on us like a heavy shroud. We knew we had to leave immediately and contact the authorities. But as we turned to make our escape, we heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. Panic set in, and we darted out of the room, locking the door behind us. Our hearts raced as we rushed to our own house, dialing 911 with trembling hands. We explained the situation to the dispatcher, our words tumbling out in a jumble of fear and urgency. The police arrived swiftly, surrounding Mr. Johnson's house. We watched from our window as they apprehended him, his face a mask of cold indifference. It was clear that he had been living a double life, one that had finally caught up to him. As they searched his house, they uncovered more evidence of his crimes, a hidden cellar with the belongings of his victims, a gruesome collection of trophies from the lives he had taken, eyes, ears, fingers. It was a horror beyond anything we could have imagined. The neighborhood that had once seemed so peaceful was forever changed by the revelation of Mr. Johnson's true nature. We had uncovered a darkness lurking in our midst. The night Mr. Johnson was arrested marked the beginning of a long and harrowing ordeal for my family. Tensions ran high as we grappled with the reality of living next door to a serial killer. It was a chilling revelation that shook us to the core. The police had gathered enough evidence to charge Mr. Johnson with multiple counts of murder, and he was swiftly taken into custody. As I watched from the window of our house as the police escorted him out of his house, hands cuffed, he caught my eyes, and he smiled, as if he knew that we had seen his deepest, darkest secrets, and that he was proud of his horrific deeds. My husband and I were questioned extensively by the police, recounting every detail of our discovery in Mr. Johnson's hidden room. It was a painful process, reliving the horror of that night, but we knew that it was necessary to ensure that justice was served. We were not the only ones affected by the revelation. The entire neighborhood was in shock, struggling to come to terms with the fact that a serial killer lived in our small neighborhood. It was as if a shadow had fallen over our once idyllic community, casting doubt and suspicion on everyone we had once considered friends. News of Mr. Johnson's arrest spread like wildfire the following days, and reporters descended on our neighborhood like a swarm of vultures. They hounded us for interviews, eager for any scrap of information about the man next door who had hidden such a gruesome secret. But amidst the chaos and the media frenzy, there was a nagging fear that gnawed at the edges of my mind. What if Mr. Johnson had left behind evidence that could implicate us in some way? After all, we had been inside his house, tampering with the locked door to his hidden room. What if our actions were misconstrued as involvement in his crimes? The unease grew when my husband and I decided we needed to confront Mr. Johnson one last time. We needed answers, and we needed to ensure that he couldn't use any information against us. We requested a meeting with him at the county jail, a meeting that filled me with dread as we walked through the cold, sterile halls of the facility. When we were finally face to face with Mr. Johnson, the room felt suffocatingly small. He looked different now, his veneer of friendliness replaced by a cold, calculating demeanor. His eyes bore into us with a predatory intensity that sent shivers down my spine. My husband wasted no time, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger as he demanded to know the extent of Mr. Johnson's crimes and whether we were in any danger. Mr. Johnson's lips curled into a sinister smile as he leaned forward, his voice dripping with malice.
You see,
He began, his voice in a low, chilling whisper.
I have always had a fascination with the lives of my neighbors. Their secrets, their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities. They've always intrigued me.
My heart sank as I realized the depth of his depravity. He'd been watching us, studying us, and who knew how much he'd learned about our family during his twisted observations.
But you,
He continued, his gaze fixed on me.
you're different. You saw too much, discovered too much, and now you're a part of my story.
The words hung in the air like a dark omen. I knew that we were in grave danger, that Mr. Johnson was not finished with us. We had unwittingly become characters in his twisted narrative, and I fear what he might do to ensure our silence. As we left the jail, a sense of dread settled over us. We had confronted Mr. Johnson, but it had only deepened the darkness that had enveloped our lives. The nightmare was far from over, and I knew that we have to remain vigilant, always watching, always waiting for the next chapter in this chilling tale to unfold. The neighborhood slowly began to heal in the wake of Mr. Johnson's arrest, but the scars of his crimes would forever haunt us. The once close-knit community had been shattered, replaced by a wary distance between neighbors who could no longer trust the faces they saw every day. In the end, justice was served and Mr. Johnson was sentenced to a lifetime behind bars, where he could no longer harm anyone. But the horror of what we had uncovered would remain with us all, a chilling reminder that evil could exist behind even the friendliest of faces. As we tried to rebuild our lives in the shadow of that revelation, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets lay hidden in the hearts of those we thought we knew. My husband has been acting strange lately. Can I trust him? Or maybe I have to kill him before he kills me.